these pathways are working together in a lot of cases.
Yeah, sure, sure. And you mentioned leucine before, and there's a lot of kind of data on leucine. When we talk about specific amino acids, it seems to be sort of one of the most robust stimulators of muscle protein synthesis. What's so unique about leucine?
Yeah, so I'm not like as big on the leucine hype train as other people. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's I think it's a very important part of like your proteins. Like you want to make sure that your protein source has sufficient leucine. So I'm not saying it's not important.
Sure.
And that's what like gets lost in 300 and whatever characters we get on Twitter, where it's like it's important. So this is a great like format for me to like expand a little bit. It's
Mhm.
definitely important, right? If I give you a drink and it has no leucine in it, like you're not going to get a robust stimulation of MPS. So with that said, it's absolutely important, and you want to make sure you're getting like 2.5 to 3 grams of leucine in your serving. But if you only give leucine, nothing happens.
Mm.
You'll get like a short increase, like a 1 to 2 hour increase in MPS. Like when you give like whey or milk or any other, soy, whatever it may be, you get like a 3 to 5 hour increase in MPS. So, you know, and you see that not only, and it's not just in MPS, acute MPS studies. When you look at studies that do like training over 12 weeks, um, there's a Brazil group that's done a lot of them. Uh, they see no increases in various measures of muscle hypertrophy due to leucine supplementation. So it's important, but on its own, it's not really going to do anything. But it's a great way to save like an inferior protein. Like I think Dr. Phillips had some of those studies where he gave soy, but he made sure to match the amount of leucine. So he put extra leucine, regular soy drink, and he just put extra leucine in it to match whey, and he got the same increase in MPS. So it's like a good niche. It's a good tool. It's absolutely critical to stimulate MPS, but uh, on its own, it doesn't really do anything. And kind of like the BCAs, right? The BCAs, you'll see the same thing where you'll get a 1 to 2 hour increase in MPS, but you don't get a prolonged, robust increase in it. And I think part of the reason it's so crucial, um, there's not much data on this, but there's some data in rabbits that if you look at the amount of like uncharged Lucille tRNAs, it kind of relates to like leucine, I think, is one of the ones that's like some of the most uncharged. So when you provide it, then the system's like charged, for lack of a better term. Um, but I like that was a 2007 paper in rabbits, and that's one of the things I always keep in my head, where it's like, whereas if you look in the liver, they have like different tRNA charging ratios. So I think there might be something with that, where it's just when you flood the muscle cell with leucine, it's like, well, and then there's everything, the other amino acids are there to help supply it to build proteins, because proteins require all the amino acids, not just leucine. Excuse me. And you're filling that need of like the rate limiting amino acid, it can just take off. So
Got
kind of a
it.
long-winded answer, and I apologize for laboring through that, but like as you ask these questions, it's like, oh, that study, and you're trying to make a coherent answer. But it's definitely important, but it's not the end all be all.
Yeah, sure. No, I appreciate you kind of, I wouldn't say clearing that up, but it's just always been something, you said the leucine hype train. I mean, you never hear other amino acids discussed sort of as much as leucine is. So I'm just, I was curious sort of one where, if there was like there probably was, a certain paper that came out that started this whole thing about leucine being this whole kind of essential, again, as you mentioned, it is essential, but almost this single arbiter of like protein synthesis, like, oh, leucine's all that matters, and apparently that's not it. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient for optimizing muscle protein synthesis is what it seems like.
Yeah, I'll say this: it's probably what triggers the initiation
Got it.
process. So that's why I think it's something with the tRNA, where it's like, and you get enough leucine in the cell, and you have those leucine sensing molecules, all that alphabet soup. I don't want to get into that too deep, but a lot of that work came from like Kimball and Jefferson's lab at Penn State, where they were funded on this stuff for like 40 years. And so you get the muscle cell sensing that there's sufficient leucine, and it's like, and if you look at like breast milk, it's pretty high in leucine.
Mm.
So it's probably like a redundant and very old pathway in humans. And so the muscle is just used to like, oh, leucine's here, let's turn on the molecular machinery. But because for I don't know what, until maybe the 50s or the 60s, when would you have had a large bolus of leucine and not had a large bolus of the rest of the protein, the rest of the amino acids?
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's
Never.
it's a pretty good system, right? Because typically foods that are high in leucine are also high in all the essential amino acids, and you need them all to build a protein. It's only like a fairly recent phenomenon where people are supplementing a leucine on its own. So maybe that's a better way of going about explaining it.
Yeah, and then I mean, in that case, though, so it seems like there would be no merit to be doing that, to just be supplementing with leucine on its own. Or I mean, if you provide additional leucine above sort of a recommended dose, is that doing anything extra? I guess that's kind of the question.
On its own, I mean, like I think I made reference to the training studies. There's like 3 or 4 training studies that show that leucine and various leucine metabolites don't have any additive effect on hypertrophy or strength gain. So, sorry, excuse me, but it's definitely an important part of a protein. I think that's the way to phrase it, and I think it's probably earned. For that reason, it's probably earned all the attention. Like, it's not like it's unwarranted.
Sure. But again, it wouldn't make sense, as you mentioned, it wouldn't just make sense that, nothing that we would have ever consumed we're never just going to get leucine on its own. If we're talking evolutionary history, anything we eat is going to contain this myriad of amino acids and things like that, which is also why I think that, this kind of relates to the discussions about, I don't know, if we talk about whole foods like fruits and vegetables and things. Oh, well, supplementing with vitamin C might not do anything because it's not contained within this whole food matrix that the interactions of which we really have no idea, and everything seems to be needs to be consumed together versus just in isolation.
Yeah, is that a question or a comment?
No, I guess it was just a comment. Yeah, I'm not necessarily asking, but feel free to provide any input.
Yeah, no,
that was just a speculation.
I think, yeah, it's interesting to see those like nutrient interactions in a whole food format. The vitamin C one's a good example. And Stephen Van Vliet is doing some of that too. He's at Duke, I believe. He'd be an excellent podcast guest, actually.
Actually, yeah, somebody else recommended him to me, I believe, too. So I'll have to reach out.
He's a top-notch dude too. He's really great. He's kind of talks about that on Twitter a lot about like, the synergy from whole food sources. So I think it's important. I mean, humans eat food, right? Like, I mean, I do study protein metabolism, and I drink whey protein. I drink some free-form amino acid drinks. And I like them. I think they're a useful tool, but like the majority of my calories comes from food. So I think it's an important point there. And it's, like you're saying, like, what am I going to do? Sprinkle a little leucine on my hamburger, or like sprinkle it on my tofu? Because, soy is pretty high in leucine. So I don't know. I think it's a good marketing gimmick by the supplement industry and people feeding into that, desire to look a certain way. And it worked for a while. And I don't know if they're still selling just leucine supplements. So maybe it's still working. I don't know.